Welcome to Gold's Garage. Obviously, we're back at Daryl Waters' Dyno service in Springfield, Ontario today, and Daryl's on the controls. And you've probably seen this engine before, so let's give you a little recap of it. I'm going to describe the engine first of all, and we'll cover a couple other points. It's kind of a lonely day today. We just got Daryl and I, and thank you very much, Sarah, for stepping up to help us out. Got a camera lady today, and she's done this for me before. She did great. So let's talk about the engine first. We're going to do two things today. We're going to dyno this engine. This is the customer is Paul Phelan. That's his carburetor. It's a 650 Edelbrock carburetor, and we're going to try some other carburetors on it as well, and just to see what the difference is. So let me describe the engine for you first. It's a 010 block, 4-bolt main 010 block, and this block has been totally prepared by Atchison machine. It's bored 30 thou. We also decked it 25 thousandths. So somebody's already asked me on my channel a question, what does that give you for deck clearance? Usually about 5 thou. Usually the deck on a standard deck on a small block Chevy is about 30 thou. So we take 25 off, and we're 5 plus or minus a couple there. So with a standard head gasket, that gives us about 45 thousandths of quench, which is nice. We have flat top pistons and eagle rods in it. Flat top Hyper-Technic pistons now, all brand new stuff in this engine. And so that gives us about 10.3, 10.4 to 1 compression ratio. And what else? The other thing, we're kind of experimenting with Summit 1202 cam, a 4.7 swap cam. So we've talked about this engine before and about the 4.7 swap, and lots of comments, it doesn't make any difference. Well, we're going to find out today. So what it does, the firing order is normally 18436.572, and now it's 18736.472. So, 542, okay? So, got that. So, different timing order, and that is, by the way, the firing order of the LS engines. So I'm pretty sure those guys at GM, when they were developing it, put some thought into it before they decided to change the firing order. So there must be something there. So we're using, it's a 1202 Summit cam, Edelbrock Performer RPM intake manifold. The customer is Paul Phelan. This is his 650. Right out of the box, we haven't done anything with it at all. And so that's all I got to say. We're going to turn it over to Daryl. And any comments you got for us before we get started, Daryl?
Just to mention that it's got a 1-inch open spacer on it as well. We ran into a small issue right off the get-go. We had a 4-hole spacer on it, and this carburetor is like a spread bore. It's got bigger secondaries than it does primaries, and we checked for wide open throttle, and on the Edelbrock and Carter carburetors, the secondaries are open with a spring-loaded lever. And it kind of fooled us because we were getting wide open throttle on the throttle linkage, but we couldn't figure out why this thing wasn't opening all the way, and then we figured out that it needed an open spacer on it so that the secondaries didn't catch. But we still have little issues here once in a while, but we caught it and figured it out. So
Daryl figured it out. So
yeah. We ran into some other issues again. This is the engine that we had issues with the dyno not being the spacer that I put in the back there, the pilot bushing not being seated properly into the crankshaft, and mounted it on the dyno last night. It locked up again, so pulled it apart, found out the crankshaft wasn't built properly. The snout where the torque converter snout goes in wasn't machined in deep enough, so I had to machine my pilot bushing. And third time was a charm, got it on there. We got crankshaft end play before we even started the engine, so we know it was safe, and we're good to go now for that. So that was what our issue was with the thrust bearing issue we had.
So lesson learned. Thankfully, we're looking at that a lot closer, of course, every time now. Make sure we got crankshaft end clearance before we even fire it. And so we have made a couple pulls. mentioned that because of the spacer, the carburetor wasn't opening, so I can tell you that this engine makes 327 horsepower on 2 barrels. Because we never had the back 2 barrels opening. That's fixed.
Yeah.
We have made a couple pulls. We're at 409 horsepower and change.
Yep. 409 horsepower and 427 foot-pounds of torque.
So that for a little 355 straight engine with a pretty small cam, we're pretty happy with that already. But we're not done. We promised some carburetor shootout, so we got Austin Ward here today with a Quadrajet carburetor. We're going to try that, and we're going to try a 650 Brawler carburetor on it too to see how they work. So stick with us. Thank you for watching and subscribing. See, Alex usually tells me that, Sarah. You got to remember to tell me that.
Like and subscribe.
Thank you for liking and subscribing, and we got more to come for you. Okay, we're back in the dyno cell again. We're doing our best. I got Sarah helping us with the video stuff. So just to recap, we made a few runs with Paul's Edelbrock carburetor, 650 Edelbrock carburetor, right out of the box. We didn't touch it. And so far we got 412 horsepower and 430 foot-pounds of torque. Pretty happy with that. And so now we're going to try what we promised is a carb shootout. So next we got Austin Ward here with his Quadrajet carburetor, and we're going to make a run with that, and you guys can talk about all the things involved with that and see what it does. And then we got also a 650 Holley Brawler carburetor, which we're going to try after that. So go ahead, guys.
Well, one thing about putting this carburetor on here, they're a spread bore carburetor compared to the intake is a square bore. So we had to use an adapter, which some may think that this gives it an advantage because it's a formed adapter, but it's really not the best scenario because it's going from spread bore down to square bore. I have something similar to this on my car, but I have adapted my intake and modified it for a square bore, and I use a spacer like this, and it does work very well like that. But this is more of just adapting it, so it has sort of disadvantages because you're taking a type of carburetor that's meant for a different intake and just adapting it. That's the reason we have that there. And this carburetor is what I run on my super stock engine, and it has to be unmodified as far as you can't cut the choke horn off or remove the choke. It's got to all be in place. No polishing of it. All we can do is drill holes for air bleeds and things like that to run properly. And we make them 1-to-1, which won't really affect power at wide open, but other than that, it's more or less a stock carburetor. You could do the same thing with a stock carburetor, just this one's been set up more for racing.
For what it's worth, how fast? What's the best time in your super stock car with this carburetor?
With this carburetor, I've ran 1001.
There you go. And
in a 3,400 pound car with a 255 horse 350. It's smog heads, 9-to-1 compression, stock size valves, but the heads are highly modified. They are ported out extensively and then they're filled back in to measure stock size. So they're far from stock, but they call them, that's why they're called super stock. They're just highly modified, but measure stock size. And we're whatever camshaft, we got to be the stock compression, any intake we want, and the carburetor has to stay stock. So you've got stock measuring heads, and a stock carburetor and stock compression.
And the valve size too, right?
Valve size is stock, 194-1.5 valves, and we've had the engine here at Daryl's on the dyno, and it's around 275 to 600 horse, depending on which combination I've had. I've had a 300 horse engine here that was 600 horse, and I think the 255 was about 280 maybe, or 580.
580, not 280.
Yeah, not 280. It was a 255 horse engine. Is what that came from GM is 255 horse.
And you rev it 8800, you said?
Yeah, I go through the traps about 80, 87.
87.
Six gears, lots of gear.
Well, the carburetor's not going to hold this engine back, that's for sure. But we'll see what it does.
Yeah.
Daryl?
We just basically, I was saying to these guys when we put that on that there's going to be some comments on the 2-inch spacer compared to the 1-inch spacer and everything, but like Austin said, adapting it from a spread board to a square board, we're doing a funnel shape thing, so it's not the ideal setup, but we don't know how it's going to work. It might work wonderful, it may not work at all, we don't know. But
it may not like it at all.
Quadrajet guys would probably say that's a disadvantage, right?
Well,
There could be.
Typically, I run a single plane intake with a adapter like this.
Okay.
And going from a open adapter like that to a dual plane intake, I guess we'll see what happens.
Let's make a poll and see what it does. Hey, welcome back. We're in the dyno cell now. So what's happened since the last clip we took? We moved the timing. We had that timing actually at 38 degrees. We moved it back to 36. And still with the box stock Eldebrock carburetor that Paul bought, 650 CFM carburetor, we made 412 horsepower and 429 point something foot-pounds of torque. So we're pretty happy with that. I'm not going to play with that any longer. So now we got Austin's Quadrajet carburetor on it. We just talked about that, and we're going to watch Daryl make a pull and see what happens. We have not started it with Austin's carburetor. Do you want to talk about it all? Or just
Yeah, it may idle a little high on this engine because I had it set up for my engine with a lot bigger camshaft, and it idled at 1100 in my car.
We haven't even fired it yet. Right?
Yeah, it may be idling pretty high, so I haven't touched anything
Let's
yet.
see what happens.
Yeah. That's not too bad.
Yeah, sounds all right. Yeah. Quadrajet carburetor, here we go.
just got to get some water temperature back into the engine. Try and make sure the water temperature is exactly where it is every run. That takes just to get rid of any variables so we can actually see the repeatability. This is the water temperature right here. Yep. Oil pressure, obviously, RPM, torque, power.
Dyno surgeon, or was that?
No, that was the engine.
Okay, we're back, and if you watched the previous clip, if you heard the sound of an engine breaking down, it was us, and we're going to have Austin tell us why he thinks it was. And Sarah, if you can zoom in on or come in and look at that graph, that is not the kind of graph we're looking for. So now, if you're just starting watching this video, we made 412 horsepower and 429 pounds of torque already in previous runs. This is with Austin's Quadrajet off his race car. Tell us what happened, Austin.
Well, we're guessing kind of at this point, but up to 4,500 we compared it to the last test, and it was pretty much on par with what the other carburetor did. And then we're thinking that possibly we don't have enough fuel pressure for this carburetor on the dyno, because I run a smaller needle and seat and higher fuel pressure in the race car than we're running here. We're at 6.5, and I run about 8.5, 9 pounds in the race car. So we're wondering if maybe it just couldn't deliver enough fuel through the smaller smaller needle and seat that I run in this carburetor. So we're going to try that and see if that's the problem, or if there's maybe something else wrong with my carburetor.
So we've adjusted fuel pressure?
Yeah, I changed the fuel pressure regulator. I got it at 9 pounds now. So we're going to do a run at 9 pounds and see if that corrects the problem. If it doesn't, then we may have a carburetor issue. And like Austin said, he's got another one here we can try. So
okay, let's stick with us there. Keep it going. Let's go ahead and fire it up and do it then. Okay, while we're running.
There we go. I need to get behind you there. Turn my water fans on. Oh, and we're chasing a small oil leak, possible, so don't freak out that it doesn't have oil pressure, because we got a plug in there right now. That's all. 412 horsepower. 437 foot-pounds of torque. So
we got more horsepower and torque with Austin's carburetor.
Horsepower is the same. They're 412.
It was 411 point something before.
Yeah, so we're 411.3, we're 412.3 now, but we're 437.6 foot-pounds of torque. So.
And last time, when we got to 140 pounds of fuel per hour being used, it just leveled off and stayed. That's why we didn't think it was enough fuel pressure to keep up.
Austin noticed that the fuel flow was actually falling or planing out. It didn't keep going up. So he's like, I don't think we have enough fuel pressure, and that's.
So whether that's the idea of this was to test the original carburetor that Paul owns, the Elderbrock 650.
Nice smooth graph.
That's a better graph.
Yeah, there's the graph. There's the graph.
So.
And Austin's Quadrajet carburetor, and we got a 650 Brawler Holly we're going to do next. Whether that's a fair test, because it's a race carburetor.
Well, and it has the.
Would you put it on a street car?
I'd change the base plate, make it progressive linkage, and then I would, yeah.
Yeah, well,
it's basically a stock.
It didn't hurt it anyway. Okay.
So, we like to do real world stuff here, and like Alan said, let's show that we did have a problem and show that we fixed it. So.
Yeah, well, these guys figured it out. So, okay, next we're going to put the Holly on and see what it does. Okay, we've tried the original carburetor, which was the Elderbrock 650 Elderbrock. Tried the Quadrajet carburetor, Austin's Quadrajet carburetor. It made a little more power and 7 or 8 more pounds of torque, I guess, eh? And the Elderbrock carburetor. So now we got a 650 Brawler carburetor on it. We're going to see what it does. So let's fire up and find out. What we got?
Yeah, 415 horsepower, and it looks like 426 foot-pounds of torque. So the Brawler made more horsepower, but the Quadrajet made more torque.
I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, and the Elderbrock is very comparable with 412 and 421, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Splitting hairs between all of them.
Yeah.
So
in the car, Paul, you won't know the difference, right?
Yeah.
So see what that graph looks like.
When I came here today, I told Darryl if we can get 400 horsepower, I'll
That's a
be
nice
happy.
graph too. Yeah.
Happy customer.
Yeah.
There's our graph. Nice flat torque curve. We're still carrying a ton of torque. Right past 5,000 RPM. We're still over 400 pounds of torque.
Yeah.
And nice graph. We're happy with that.
Yeah.
So that.
We talked about it before too, like off camera, about carburetor shootouts between different engine builders and stuff, and we all come to the same kind of conclusions. Like if the CFM rating is about the same between carburetor to carburetor, and you get the jetting proper, they're all going to work within 2-3 horsepower one another. But this just confirms it now.
And we haven't, other than fixing the fuel pressure for Austin's carburetor, we haven't done any jetting or anything like that. The carburetor, the Elderbrock's right out of the box, never touched it.
Brawler's the same.
Brawler's
way.
right
It's
out
a
of the
brand new
box.
too.
The Elderbrock's right off Austin's race car.
Yeah.
A 9-second race car. So.
Yeah.
So anyways, they all work fine. Paul, your engine runs great. And thank you very much, Austin. And thank you much for Darryl for long day today. Lots of things. We have had kind of a leak in the, we thought a leak in the oil pressure gauge line, so that's why it disconnected, but we made multiple pulls before that. We had lots of oil pressure, so that's not an issue. Okay, so we finished the carburetor shootout. We're going to have a sum up at the end with Austin and Darryl together, but all the things that happened today. Pretty eventful day. We all worked hard. So the other thing that was interesting was air breathers, and I think this is particularly going to be interesting for guys with Corvettes or engines where you don't have a lot of hood clearance and you're forced to run a narrow air cleaner. I actually bought this filter just for that reason. This is just a standard 3-inch. This is the base plate off my Camaro actually, and I have the top also. We're going to try just the base plate, then we're going to try a 3-inch, then we're going to try a 1-inch and see what they do. 3 more pulls. Keep watching, you'll see what the results are. Hey, welcome back to Gold's Garage. So we're going to sum up here. We're sitting on our Dodge chairs, which is kind of sacrilegious for me. But
well, I said you guys are going to get a rash from both sitting on them. You're both Chevy guys, but
Chevy guys sitting on Dodge chairs. Anyways, so we worked pretty hard today. Daryl and I and Austin, we've been here since this morning. We made lots of pulls. Paul, your engine's great. We just kind of sum up quickly. We promised we'd test carburetors and we test air breathers. So we tested Paul's original Elderbrock carburetor. We tested Austin. He's going to talk about his Quadrajet carburetor, and we tested a Brawler 650. The Brawler and the Elderbrock are both 650s, and these guys can tell you what the results were. Then we did the air cleaner test as promised. We tested the air cleaner base, then we tested a regular 3-inch filter and a 1-inch filter. So go ahead, you take it from there, and I'll sum up.
Like I said earlier in the videos, that you can put pretty well any carburetor on any engine as long as the CFM rating's the same and you spend the time jetting it. They're all going to make within 2-3 horsepower of each other, basically. Austin's Quadrajet, it worked the best as far as torque-wise goes, and he'll get into that maybe later on too. Basically, yeah, it was a good day. We did the air cleaner base test on there too, and found out that going from just a plain air cleaner base to a 3-inch air cleaner filter and the 1-inch, it was probably like 2-3 horsepower.
We lost
difference.
a little bit on the 1-inch. Yeah.
We lost when we put the filters on, but it wasn't a huge loss by any means. So if anybody says that throwing an air filter on is going to take a lot of horsepower, it really didn't bother it that much. And you wouldn't even notice it in the car. Like, you wouldn't feel that. We've seen it on the dyno, but in a car you'd never feel that because it wasn't significant.
Old drag racing days, you jack it up, put the slicks on, take the breather off, right?
Yeah.
Sounded great, made a lot of noise, but that didn't make any difference. So keep going, Daryl. Sorry.
Didn't really have any big issues with it. The engine worked really well. I'm really happy with the torque and the horsepower it made. It's got a real nice flat torque curve, so the car's going to pull really good. It's going to feel like it's got a lot more power than it does. But it's a really good engine build that you did, Alan. It worked out good.
We're happy with it. I told Daryl when we got here, if I can make 400 horsepower, I'll be happy, and we made 414, I guess, eh?
Yeah.
414. And with Austin's carburetor, 430 some.
It's 437 foot-pounds of torque, and I think the same horsepower pretty much, right?
Yeah, the horsepower didn't really change a whole lot.
But Paul, stick to your Elderbrock carburetor. 2 or 3 horsepower at peak RPM, you're never going to notice it. It's going to be just fine.
I just kind of wanted to touch on too the problem we had with fuel pressure.
Tell us
That's
about
not someone keeps trying to get a hold of me. That's not a typical problem you're going to have with every Quadrajet. Mine is set up to run with higher fuel pressure because in the drag racing we're accelerating down the track with 1/2-inch fuel line, and so you need a lot of pressure to push that fuel up to the carburetor. And
There's a lot of weight there.
there's a lot of weight there. So then we get it to the regulator with that pressure, and then we set the regulator up to run a little higher pressure as well for during acceleration. And if we run a larger needle and seat, it would overpower the float. So we run a small needle and seat so we can run higher pressure. And here we had more of a street car set up for pressure, and my carburetor is not exactly set up to run with that pressure, so it kind of starved for fuel when it got to farther through the RPM range, because the Quadrajet has a small fuel ball. They don't hold as much fuel as a Holly does, and Holly has 2 needle and seats. The Edelbrock has 2 needle and seats. They're both probably about 110 orifice, and my Quadrajet has 120 orifice and only 1.
Yeah.
So you have to run higher pressure to supply the same amount of fuel.
Once we gave it the fuel, right?
Then it came right around.
It actually made the most power, right?
Right.
One horsepower.
Yeah,
or something
and
like
but
that.
a lot of say more, if you just had it on the street, you'd run a larger diameter needle and seat and run a mechanical pump, and you'd have no problems running 6.5, 7 pounds of fuel pressure.
Right.
It's just mine was set up for racing, so
for you drag racing guys,
we
you
had
might
to
be
change it for
interested in
that. But
this.
it's not what every car, not every Quadrajet needs that.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's
Anything
the
else,
same.
Austin?
Oh,
Go
I was just going to say the same with the fuel pump that I run. Like I run 800 horse engines on here with a 230 gallon per hour Barry Grant pump, and people are like, there's no way I can nail that. But I don't have, like Austin said, the G-forces to overcome. So
Right.
as long as I can supply the volume, it'll run.
Right.
Yeah, because if you got a 1/2-inch fuel line from the back of the car to the front,
Mhm.
you might have I don't know what that would work out to, a 1/2 gallon or a gallon
You
of
gotta
fuel,
push it.
and so you're trying to push that
Keep it
fuel
ahead of the car.
forward, and the car is accelerating, and the G-force is pushing the fuel
Yeah,
back. So
I never thought
The
of that.
specific
actually,
gravity
yeah.
of the fuel works out like
Yeah.
6.4 pounds per gallon. So
Yeah.
if you get a 1/2 gallon, there's 3 pounds of fuel.
Yep.
Of fuel you got to push forward.
Yeah, and if we have too much pressure, and we have a larger diameter needle and seat, it overpowers the float and floods the carburetor. So we kind of do a balancing act to get our carburetors to work right at the drag strip.
You were a lot of trouble, actually, Austin. to tell you the truth. So I'm pretty happy. This is for Paul Phelan, my customer. He has a 64 Chev, and Paul's been pretty patient because he's been waiting for this engine for a while, and we're happy with it. We got her done 414, 430, something like that. 414 horsepower, 430.
Yeah.
Plus or minus, Paul, a couple of horsepower with your Edelbrock carburetor. It's going to run just fine. And we did not do anything about jetting with any of the
No.
carburetor. We just put them in the way they come out of the
Yeah,
box.
the Brawlers,
Brawler's out of the
stock.
box, and so's the
So's the
Edelbrock.
Edelbrock, yeah.
Well, my Quadrajet's not out of the box.
Sometimes the more you work on it, the worse it gets too. You have to keep that in mind, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. I hope everybody enjoyed this and learned something. We promised we test air filters, and we promised we test carburetors. So we did 3 different carburetors, 3 different air breather combinations, and you got the results. Mike will publish screenshots of the torque and horsepower curves and the data that we got and the carburetor information for you. Please remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching Gold's Garage.